Archaeologists find evidence of humans in California long before mainstream science thought. A copper scroll shows a treasure map to Jerusalem's lost wealth. Some say it was deliberately hidden from the public. And mysterious artifacts from ancient Rome thought to be forgeries for hundreds of years turn out to be real. These are forbidden archaeological discoveries that experts warn people not to study. Back in 1992, a routine road construction project in San Diego accidentally hit a massive pile of bones. And it turned out to be mastodon remains. The problem was how the bones were found. They were arranged in a specific way, and more importantly, they'd been broken in a style that only happens when someone uses a heavy stone as a hammer and another as an anvil to smash into the marrow. Now, when archaeologists dated the site, the results came back at 130,000 years old. This caused a lot of controversy because the accepted timeline for humans arriving in North America was only about 15,000 years ago. So accepting this, well, it meant admitting that humans, or some form of human relative, were living in California over 100,000 years earlier than researchers had previously thought. For decades, skeptics tried to write the site off, saying it was contaminated, that the damage to the bones must have been caused by the construction equipment. They didn't want to touch it because it threatened to delete every textbook written on the subject. So there's a spot along the Savannah River in South Carolina called the Topper Site, and for a long time it was completely unremarkable, but it ended up at the center of one of the biggest fights in American archaeology. For about 100 years, there was basically one rule that everyone agreed on. The first people in the Americas were the Clovis people, and they showed up around 13,000 years ago. That was it. End of story. But then there's this guy, Albert Goodyear, a respected researcher. He decided to keep digging into things. Everyone else would hit that Clovis layer and then stop. Goodyear went deeper, way deeper. And down in soil that was at least 50,000 years old, he started pulling out small stone flakes and what looked like tools. His colleagues were not happy. They basically told him he was imagining things. They said he was seeing shapes in rocks that broke by accident and then calling them tools, and that if he kept this up, he was going to destroy his whole career. But Goodyear pushed back. He pointed out that there were no rivers or fast-moving water of any kind near the spot that could have tumbled rocks around and created those kinds of edges naturally. That argument didn't really go anywhere with the establishment, but he wasn't wrong. The site is still up in the air today. The dirt says one thing, but the mainstream academic world says another. Most of the Dead Sea Scrolls are written on leather or papyrus, and most of them are religious texts, prayers, hymns, that kind of thing. But in 1952, researchers found one that didn't fit at all. It was made of metal, actual copper, and it was so corroded that they had to carefully saw it into strips just to unroll it and read what was on it. When they finally did, there were no prayers inside. Instead, it was a list of 64 locations, and at each one, massive amounts of gold, silver, and precious incense were supposedly buried. Right away, a lot of researchers said it had to be fake. The quantities listed were more gold and silver than actually existed in the entire region at the time, but the directions were pretty specific. The theory that makes the most sense to some researchers is that this was a list of where the Temple of Jerusalem's wealth was hidden right before the Romans came in and leveled the city. And some people think the whole, it's probably fake message was actually spread on purpose, because if word got out that there was a real treasure map in the Middle East, well, every historical site would have been blown apart by people looking for it. For over 300 years, a set of gold coins from Transylvania were used as a classroom example of how to spot counterfeit. The coins showed a man named Sponsianus. Problem was, there was no Roman emperor by that name. When the coins showed up in the 1700s, they were labeled fakes. They got tossed in a museum drawer, but in 2022, researchers put the coins under electron microscopes, the really powerful kind that can see microscopic scratches, and what they found was that the coins had tiny deep marks all over them, consistent with being shoved into leather pouches and passed around as actual money for years. The chemical makeup of the coins showed they'd been buried in soil for centuries, not made in an 18th century workshop. So Sponsianus was probably real. The best guess now is that he was a military commander in a Roman province that got cut off from the rest of the empire. So with no coins coming in and the economy falling apart, he probably just made his own. He never made it into the official history books, so when his coins showed up 1,500 years later, everyone assumed it was just a scam. In 1924, a French teenager was out plowing a field when he fell into a hidden pit. Inside were thousands of objects, clay tablets, bones, strange figurines, covered in unrecognized writing. The site became known as Glozel, and some of the biggest names in archaeology at the time came out to see it and called it the most important discovery in history. Others called it an obvious fraud. The whole thing escalated until the police raided the farm, and the kid who found it actually got sued for supposedly running a scam. For decades, the official position was, don't study Glozel, don't even say the word Glozel if you want to be taken seriously. When carbon dating became a thing though, and the artifacts were tested in the 70s, the results were all over the place. Some pieces were medieval, some were from the Iron Age, some were much older than that, which actually makes sense. It looks like the site was used by different groups of people across thousands of years. Point is, it wasn't a hoax. In the early 2000s, a stone box showed up on the antiques market. Carved into the side were the words, James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. If it was real, it was the first physical object ever found that referenced the historical Jesus directly. The Israel Antiquities Authority said the brother of Jesus part had been carved recently into an old box to make it worth more money, though. They arrested the owner and put him through a criminal trial that dragged on for 5 years. The main argument was that the patina, that thin layer that builds up on stone over hundreds and hundreds of years, had been faked using some kind of chemical mixture. But during the trial, scientists from the Geological Survey of Israel testified that the patina inside the letters was natural. It had grown there over centuries. The owner was eventually acquitted, and the case fell apart. Everyone knows now that the Vikings reached North America about 500 years before Columbus, but for a really long time, saying that out loud was enough to get you laughed out of a room. The old Norse stories, the Vinland sagas, described voyages to a place across the Western Sea. For generations, historians called them myths. Entertaining stories, sure, but not history. Anyone who suggested Norse explorers actually made it to the Americas was wasting their time. So when a man named Helge Ingstad started searching the coast of Newfoundland in the 60s, nobody took him seriously. Even when he found the remains of buildings that looked just like Viking longhouses, critics still were not accepting it. They said the buildings were either indigenous or built by later European settlers. But what eventually settled it wasn't the buildings. It was a tiny stone spindle, a tool used for spinning wool. It's a completely ordinary household object, but indigenous people in that area didn't use spindles like that. Norse women did. And that was it. It finally forced the whole world to admit that the history being taught in schools was inaccurate. In 1972, French scientists were running routine tests on uranium ore from a mine in Gabon, Africa. But something was very strange. Uranium had the wrong ratio of isotopes. In any normal deposit anywhere on Earth, those ratios are fixed. It's basically, a law of nature, but this uranium looked like it had already been run through a nuclear reactor, basically like it had been used. Someone had to have made a mistake. Had to be contamination, a lab error, something explainable. The actual answer was stranger than any of that. About 1.8 billion years ago, the conditions in that specific location were just right. Nature built its own nuclear reactor. No people involved. It ran for hundreds of thousands of years and then slowly burned itself out. Nuclear fission is supposed to be a human invention, one of the most advanced things we've ever figured out, but the Earth was doing it in the ground nearly 2 billion years before we existed. Scientists are still studying it, partly because the radioactive waste stayed remarkably contained over all that time. We still haven't figured out how to do that ourselves. Troy was a legend. Then it was found, and then people decided it wasn't impressive enough. For a long time after the site was discovered, historians looked at this small hilltop and said, that's it? This tiny fort is what all those stories were about? The Iliad had to be a massive exaggeration. The official line was that people shouldn't take the epic poems too literally. Troy was probably just a little outpost, not a major city. Well, from 1982 to 1987, a German archaeologist by the name of Manfred Korfmann used magnetic imaging equipment to scan the fields around the known site. And what he found was that the hill was just the palace. Beneath the surrounding land was an entire lower city, a big one, with a defensive trench, streets, and housing for thousands of people. The academic world attacked him for this. Other scholars accused him of hyping up the site, making it sound more dramatic than it was to get attention. The argument got so bad that German newspapers started calling it the War over Troy. Nobody wanted to admit that the poetic version of the city might have actually been closer to the truth than the conservative academic version. On the border of Chile and Argentina, near the summit of a volcano more than 22,000 feet up, 3 Incan children were left there as offerings over 500 years ago. Because of how cold it is up there and how little oxygen there is, they didn't decay. They didn't mummify the way Egyptian remains do. They completely froze. They still have blood in their veins. They still have food in their stomachs. They almost look like they just fell asleep. It's pretty eerie. When they were found, the warnings came from 2 different directions. Scientists said they should never have been moved because the technology to properly preserve them once they were off the mountain just wasn't there. And there was a huge ethical debate too about whether it was appropriate to put the remains of these really young people who died in a ritual behind glass in a museum for tourists to come and gawk at. And there's still a lot of ethical concerns surrounding the remains to this day. But that has been the video. I will catch you, yes you specifically, in the next one.